so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Megan Riley, and I'm the Education and Outreach Manager for the North American Marine Environment Protection Association, also known as NAMEPA. And welcome to the first of our Sea Safety Series for 2024, Navigational Hazards, Challenges, and Solutions. So we are the North American Marine Environment Protection Association, and I'm just going to advance my slide. 1 second, there it goes. I want to say welcome to everyone today. So we are known as NAMEPA, the North American Marine Environment Protection Association, and our mission is preserving the marine environment by promoting sustainable maritime industry best practices and educating the public to save our seas. But the best person to talk about this is our co-founder and CEO, Carleen Leiden-Walker. So Carleen, I want to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Megan, and thank you to the two gentlemen who are going to be joining us today on our Safety for Seas series. This is predicated on the IMO's World Maritime theme for 2024, and this is our inaugural event, so we're excited about it. As Megan mentioned, we're the bridge between commerce and conservation. So we work with industry and we promote the best practices, but we're also concerned about the public, educating them about saving our seas, but also educating them on the value proposition of our industry. In many ways, the general public suffers from sea blindness. And NAMEPA's mission, one of our missions, is to eradicate that, to let them know how their lives are inextricably linked with the maritime industry. And we do this for a number of reasons. The more aware they are, the public is aware of their involvement and their relationship with the sea, the more they're going to want to be good stewards of it. But also, we present opportunities for them to learn about the industry and become involved with the industry, creating pathways for careers for people that may not necessarily see themselves as part of our industry, but would like to join and have a successful career. So we offer this webinar series throughout the year with the leadership of Megan Riley. And we also have 3 maritime industry events that we hold. One's going to be in Houston next month. Washington, D.C. is part of National Maritime Week. And then we're going to be in October in New York with our Marine Environment Protection Conference and Awards. So enough from me. I know you want to hear the speakers. So thank you very much for giving me a couple minutes to promote NAMEPA. If you are a member, thank you. If you haven't joined yet is the operative word, and we would look forward to welcoming you to membership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carleen. All right, so now that you've had a little chance to hear about us, let's meet our 2 panelists that we have this afternoon. So we are joined by Tony Smith, who is the Vice President, Principal Surveyor, Head of Surveys and the Technical Department at the American Club. Tony, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Do you want to give us a little bit of your background?
You're welcome. Glad to be here, Megan, and all, and good to be with you, Rob. Yeah, I spent a good chunk of my early life at sea in the British Merchant Marine, almost 16 years there, and then came ashore to work as a marine surveyor for a number of companies, and both hull machinery and P&I surveys, and following that, joined the American Club 11 years ago to head up the survey department in the loss prevention department, where we, as well, the international group, we have a policy, we all do, of surveying ships on a regular basis when they reach a certain age threshold. And we try and make sure they comply with the requirements, regulations, and also, of course, standards that we expect in a variety of areas. So that's my job, is to check the health of the fleet, as it were. And that's my background.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Tony. And our second panelist is Rob Hughes. Now, you may remember him from our MARPOL series, but he is back to join us again, and he is the Chief Commercial Officer of McAllister Towing. So, Rob, thank you so much for joining us again.
Well, thank you for having me, Megan and Carlene. It's an honor to be here alongside Tony and the people that are dialing in for the call. Of my background, after going to the Merchant Marine Academy, I sailed in the American Merchant Marine for about 7 years, coming ashore, working shoreside for owners primarily, and being recalled with the Navy as well. I am a master mariner, and I am a captain in the Navy, and a large volume of experience operationally on the waterfront for sure. Most recently with McAllister. So honored to be here, honored to be with McAllister, and hopefully we can enlighten some people about the waterfront and how we can get there together as a team. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rob. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen real quick here. All right. So we're going to be talking about navigational hazards, challenges, and solutions, which is quite a big topic to cover. But so we kind of broke it down into some pillars that are involved with this, and we're going to first jump into our operational challenges. So the first question I'm going to throw to Rob: how have bridge operations been updated to fit new technologies that we are seeing aboard vessels?
Well, when I went to sea, everything was done by hand. No shortage of checklists and binders and paper and things that could they have been pencil whipped? Sure. Could they have been backdated? Sure. Even logs of work hours, could they have been pencil whipped? I think the thing about digitalization that has pushed our industry is accountability. But I think it's more than that. I think it's culture forming. So if the process is actually being done, there's a level of certainty and comfort that it is being done properly, and there's an audit trail when it was done last. So there's a great deal of potential here, right? It's a lot. I think it's a possibility to improve what the industry was when I went to sea. Our industry. The industry I'm in now, a sub-industry of the towing, is under a massive change right now. Subchapter M is absolutely revolutionary. It's basically digitizing and forcing a level of compliance that had not been there for a lot, if ever. But the deep sea sector had seen that. So it's great. It's refreshing to see on a lot of things because it's standardizing the training, it's standardizing the equipment, and it's standardizing the accountability. Training, equipping our people, but empowering them. I think it's great, and it also gives left and right limits. People are not working more than they should. It makes things a lot safer on the waterfront when people are adhering to rest hours and that it's documented properly. I think that if everyone plays by the same rules, some of the unfortunate tragedies that we've seen, whether near coastal or at sea, are at least minimized. And if we could save a couple of sailors' lives, one sailor's life, or even a life or a limb, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Very well put. And Tony, do you have anything to add with your years of experience, anything you're noticing with your clients?
Very eloquently put, Rob. Back in the day when I sailed, there was no such thing. And so I've seen great benefits from the safety management systems that have been implemented on board ships. And it does bring into question that there is an extra workload, of course, which the officers have to bear. And I do think that at times with the shrinking crews on board, when I sailed, typically were twice as many officers perhaps on board ship that there are now. So it does bring extra workload, but I think overall it's been a tremendous boon to safety, and the results have shown that the incidents of serious casualties have certainly diminished over the years. So I'm all for it. It's been and we as the American Club and part of the IG, take a close look at the management on board ships when we go on and do a little bit of an audit to make sure that they're the best we can during a short 8-hour survey to make sure they're complying and keeping up with what they should be.
Yes. Now, over the years, we're seeing more and more people take to the seas, both in commercial and personal watercraft. Now, I know, Rob, we had talked about this before we joined on to this call, but are you seeing a rise in both of your areas? And I know both of you are based in New York City, but I'm sure you're seeing a rise in this personal watercraft that are being brought into these harbors.
Yeah, I did, and I was surprised to learn doing some independent research here that there's over 1 million personal watercrafts, and they include anything from jet skis to the boats that are unregistered, right? But the weekend Navy, as we used to joke, right? But more than that, there's a lot of risk that goes with that when you operate in the maritime domain. Tony and I were trained for 4 years before we even stepped foot as officers aboard ship. And it's not uncommon in some states in the United States, particularly, and this is a worldwide problem, that you could charter or take a boat or a jet ski out, you need to sign a waiver, and there you are. And you could be scooting around New York Harbor, or even just with a simple waiver, $25, and there you are, wave jumping. Vessels that can't move. They don't have the ability to respond. Cutting in front of some of a tow or barge or a vessel at sea speed out the Narrows can be dangerous, and it will. Unfortunately, people don't know the rules of the road. It took a great amount of study to master, to understand even what navigational marks mean, right? Buoys mean things. They tell a story to mariners. Red right returning, but where the obstacles are, things that are obstructed. I mean, it's horrible how many accidents actually happen, and you read about it on any given boating weekend. Young kids, young people hitting jetties or hitting rocks, or not knowing that sandbars are there, and hitting it at full speed. But that's not just a danger to the vessels that we operate, but it's a danger to the people on the waterfront.
Yeah. The speeds that those vessels are doing, some of them are in excess of 30, 40, 50 knots. And many bodies of water, there's no speed limit. They can do whatever they want. It's from of course, from the ocean-going vessels perspective, we don't really have as much of there's not as much of an impact for us as there would be to coastal vessels like you're operating, Rob. But there should be, every state should have minimum requirements. But I tell you what, the boating license that I took in Connecticut was very, very sketchy. I mean, it was something, but it really wasn't. I don't think it was helpful, but it was they don't require a lot, really. Very, very basic, but it's better than nothing, and many states don't have them at all. You were saying in Massachusetts they don't have any, Megan, right? There's no boating license.
Yeah, so we have a boating license, but to rent a boat, you don't need one. You just need a driver's license, which is not entirely the same.
No.
Tony, within your areas, can you discuss the role of modern technologies such as those electronic charts in mitigating navigational hazards? And in terms of safety, how accurate are those and reliable are those electronic charts?
Well, they're extremely accurate and reliable, and they play a huge role in improving navigational safety. I think the concern that we as mariners have is that there's too much reliance on ECDIS, where navigators can lose situational awareness very easily. There's been numerous examples of this, where you've got your head buried into a essentially a computer screen, and you lose the benefit of being on a bridge wing or looking out of the bridge windows, and you can sense the drift, and you can sense ships and the proximity to you and how they're crossing. So as far as it's a tool, they are incredible. When I sailed it originally, we didn't even have GPS. It was all by sextant. I'm giving away on my age a bit there, I know, but that's how it was. And here we are, a few decades later, and we've got these marvelous tools, but they've got to be used carefully. And also the officers have to be familiarized with the ACTIS. There's actually, it's one thing being familiarized, having an ACTIS certification, but you should also have familiarization with the specific type, whether it be through the maker or through some training through the management system the company has. So I ramble on, but outstanding piece of technology that is game changing. I'll leave it to you, Rob, to make further comment on that.
I agree with you. I mean, when I first started to go to sea, it was grease plots, right?
Yeah.
And moving on into ARPA and ACTIS and AIS, these are great tools.
Yeah.
But if you stare too long at them, it can be problematic. But knowing specifically your equipment is just as important.
Yes.
Getting trained on it beforehand. I remember joining ships in the late 90s where you signed on and they gave you 2 big binders. This is your your ARPA. Okay. How talented are you with that piece of apparatus? I jest, but over the summer I remember seeing a guy had a very lovely yacht, and satellite communication and double radars. Wow. Do you know how to use that? Nope. But they look cool. Okay. The guy was very blessed in life, and it was a very beautiful yacht, but he didn't know how to use it. So that's part of the problem. But another part of the problem is these advances in technology. Listen, unfortunately, the Ever Given, right? We had an unfortunate incident in the Chesapeake Bay not too long ago, where it appears not just electronic diversions on the phone, right, or multitasking, trying to do too much,
right,
trying to be the Superman, knowing your limitations and applying them appropriately to their prevailing conditions. So I think that there's also an element, even for people that are not licensed, that are not qualified, not knowing the full extent of the limitations of their boat or their equipment, and getting themselves into deep trouble. So yeah, I would say that bears to be spoken as well. Thank you.
Yes. Now, Rob, within your area of expertise, where are we seeing the most advances in technology in regards to navigational safety, and where might there be some weaknesses that we need to reevaluate and take a look at?
Gosh, there's been so many advances. I mean, from the time that Tony and I went to see, I mean, Inmarsat was the thing. Now we have Starlink and personal EPIRBs, if you can believe things. And we have definitely increased the level of accessibility to all kinds of access to reduce, improve safety, reduce incidents. Where am I seeing the most advances? I think right now you're starting to see advances in performance management, for sure, on ships, which will help improve the maintenance of the ships as well and the consumptions. That's huge. But as far as safety, I see more focus on learning your equipment before you go on board the ship. When I requalified with my master's license recently, they specifically asked the type of equipment I'll be working with. And I haven't been to sea for a while, so I said, what's the most prevalent out there on the fleet? And I had to get qualified on that specific piece of Verona. And I thought that was great, to become not only familiar with that specific piece that I was going to be joining. but understanding the limitations, because much like when I was a Green cadet or even a third officer, if you're not familiar with your radar settings, you might lose the target, all right, by putting up by not having the gain up enough or the tune up enough. Anthony knows Tony knows what I'm talking about here, especially.
I do, yeah.
It's but familiar, that feel of what it is and getting out there, and there's no substitute for you're really paid to put your face out the window glass, right, and step out on the bridge wing and feel it and see what's going on.
I think also that a new integrated bridge systems are otherwise known as the acronym IBS, are, a thing of the future and are being developed now, which is the combination of systems all interconnected to allow centralized access to sensor information. And I see that's probably something that's going to be coming more common in time.
Now, Tony, I'm going to throw this question to you first, but recently I watched, and I'm sure there are other people that have seen this, there's a new movie out on Netflix called Leave the World Behind with Julia Roberts, and it's kind of takes place in the near future. But in there's a scene where an oil tanker is seen coming towards the shore. Mm-hmm. And it has lost all directional safety, and everyone on the beach is thinking, oh, it's going to stop, and it doesn't, and it runs aground. And we learn later that all satellite connection has been completely cut off. There is no Wi-Fi, phones aren't working, TVs aren't working, and so it lost connection and wasn't able to properly navigate. Where are you seeing protection in terms of cybersecurity, and what do vessels have to prevent something like this taking over, or an outside entity coming in and taking over control over the bridge of a vessel with everything being computerized?
Well, this is something which, of course, we all have more concern with recently. We, from our perspective, when we go on vessels, there's a whole section based on cybersecurity to make sure that vessels are secure, and it's something that we're developing questionnaires and inspection techniques to make sure that they are. One of the biggest risks, of course, on board a ship is where a surveyor goes on board or somebody goes on board and they stick a thumb drive in the vessel's computer to download a document or something. Those types of simple things are, of course, forbidden, and there's protocols to prevent that and train the crew to make sure they're aware of that. And as far as hacking is concerned, I can't speak from the IT perspective as what is needed or required there, to be honest with you. Do you have any better perspective from your angle, Rob?
As far as hacking, or generally speaking, I think that there's been a big push by a lot of ship owners and tugboat owners right now to harden their cybersecurity on board, and also give training to the people that are joining. Yeah. It's not just getting access to the GPS, or, like you said, the thumb drives, things that very common, right, that people would do, but that information security of how things are operated, how things are hearted, and they're even coded, right? Who has access to the vessel? Right. It's another big one, right? I mean, it's defending your vessel starts with who gets on board, whether it be physically or electronically, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to keep those things at bay. Particularly, I could see. I think the risk is less with navigational risk. I think it's actually with people succumbing to fraud right now, with the employees that are on the ship that are, they're getting paid, right? And who falls for a spoof of, oh, yeah, this is from HR and you have to click on this and update your information. And, that's the part of the big training that has to roll out to our people as a culture, that
Yeah.
you have to be smart about not only what you plug in, but what you're clicking, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
That ship that was barreling towards the coast, maybe I should watch that movie. I wonder if they actually was anybody on the bridge looking out through the windows or on the bridge wing. They could just have put the telegraph at stop or put the engines astern and stop that from happening.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
yeah.
was wondering that. I was like, I feel like there's another thing that is happening here that's, you know, causing this to happen.
Sounded
But
like somebody had it. Sounds like somebody had it on automatic pilot.
yes,
And
someone wasn't
yeah,
paying attention, had
yeah,
their head buried in that electronic chart.
yeah.
So Megan, Claudia had a question she put in the chat here about jamming outside the vessel. AAS can be jammed. There's
Yeah.
been reports of those being jammed,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in areas of interest like the Black Sea, near China, areas of conflict. This can happen, right? If your deep sea vessels are operating in that area, your level of confidence is definitely low. And
Yeah.
terrestrial means old school sights and bearings, range and bearings for sure, using your radar. Go back to old school, right? In those areas that are near terrestrial and the littoral regions for sure.
Well, Rob, didn't the Navy bring back celestial navigation after putting it to bed for a little while?
They never pulled it from the Merchant Marine Academy I went to. Naval Academy they did, but
Right.
Merchant Marine
Yeah.
Academy,
Naval Academy. Yeah. Right.
even when I came ashore, I taught celestial navigation for 3 years at the Merchant Marine Academy.
Right.
I'm actually very fond of it. I loved it.
Mass Maritime still got it as well, and they're still using paper charts. So
Yeah.
it is they're still teaching the good old ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Moving into more of our regulatory measures, Tony, I was looking online and just saw that SOLAS is putting in some amendments into some of those regulations and addressing navigational hazards. Can you talk a little bit about any of those regulations, what your experience is with those SOLAS regulations?
Well, I think Rob would probably be better suited to answer this question. He actually had done some research into it before. I didn't prepare myself for that question.
Yeah. So SOLAS, definitely a legally binding treaty, right? Applies to all ships on international voyages. Comes down to flag states looking at enforcing the provisions of SOLAS on those vessels, right? Port state control as well, right? When they go to ports, they have the authority to inspect to make sure those standards are in place. Are they? Listen, the SOLAS started because of tremendous loss of life, right? I mean, the goal as they improve over the years, as you know better, you do better, right? And we try to, as an industry, we try. I've been in those meetings with at the IMO in London, where these things are wrestled, right? But the goal, whether it be for flashpoints of fuel, certain cargoes, or the safety of the crew themselves, right? They're moving forward to try to increase the level of safety for the crews, for the mariners themselves, to make sure that everyone comes home with all their fingers and toes. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
But there is a negative safety trend, though. Listen, we got to be honest about what's going on in the past, call it through COVID and whatnot. I mean, if we're honest, across the board, there's been a lot of, during COVID wasn't kind for a lot of things. It wasn't kind for crews being stuck on board. It wasn't kind at all for maintenance of the vessels because they couldn't get parts. And that leads to incidents, right? So when we start talking about impact on navigational safety, yeah, has there been more breakdowns? Statistically, the data is there to support that, right? Lloyd's List Intelligence reveals the negative trends. They come up with the numbers. It's not a good report card, right? We definitely have some brew. Everything from fires were rising, while the things that scared us 10 years ago, like piracy, has decreased sharply. But now flip the switch, piracy is back in vogue, and now we're worried about drones and the Red Sea again, right? I mean, one thing's for certain about the merchant marine is that nothing is ever certain.
Yes. Yes.
That's why it takes dynamic, talented men and women as merchant marine officers aboard these ships to have the right amount of have a firm foundation of training that they can grow and evolve with the challenges.
Yeah.
Yes. And how are you guys specifically within both of your organizations? How is safety playing a role? I mean, I know McAllister, you're a towing company, and so do you want to talk about what safety that is, and then Tony, you can jump in.
Sure. I think you're going to find a lot of commonality here because
there is indeed.
It all starts and ends with safety. Everyone's a safety officer, from the deck plates to the wheelhouse, even to the boardroom. Everyone's a safety officer. If something is unsafe, I dare say that every crew member, team member has a duty to raise their hand. That something, that can be an evolution can be unsafe, and we talk about it. Are the risks? What are the risks? How are they mitigated? And how do we get there how do we do this safely? But I think there's going to be a lot of commonality between me and Tony on this one, because he's on the P&I side, but this is something that as a former ship owners group and onto the tugboats, owners of the tugboats, we're focused on the crew, right? Crew, we try to minimize the crew, any damage to any issues for the crew firstly and foremost. If there's damage to the tug, we can replace a bent ring or a bump or whatever it might be. It shouldn't happen, but it does happen. But when it does happen, let's hope nobody gets hurt, right? Everyone goes home with their fingers and toes.
When we take a ship on as a new risk, or periodically too, we do detailed surveys, which usually take 8 to 12 hours, and we check a series of things. Shipboard management, of course, is a big thing. One of those things within shipboard management is the protocol for reporting incidents, near misses, and lessons learned that are vital. If there was some incident which caused was cropped up on a ship, this should be reported, and there should be corrective actions taken and lessons learned, and this should be passed around the fleet to pass on that information. Safety on board is a big thing, of course. Fire safety, we check vessels' equipment and also their standards of firefighting. Pollution and environmental awareness. Navigation, of course, is a big thing we check. Machinery, that's a huge item of danger. There's two things. We had recently aware of a ship that was bunkering diesel oil, and there are procedures when you're bunkering that are to be followed to make sure you do it safely. And they didn't follow it to the letter, and unfortunately a sounding pipe in the engine room was left open, and diesel oil was spraying around, got sucked in by a vent onto a hot surface, and caused 3 deaths. No, 2 deaths, and the third person's clinging to life. But these are things that, so simple to have been avoided if they just followed the protocols that were there, and also that incident would never have occurred. So some of these things may seem very minimal, or shall we say simple, and how can anybody leave a fuel oil sounding pipe open in the engine room? In fact, you'll often find on board ships they'll actually have them wired open in the open position, because it's less inconvenient for them to do the soundings. So anyway, we check everything on board ships, and you can't catch everything, but overall we go through things with a fine tooth comb.
Yeah, so safety measures and protocols are very important.
Extremely. Yeah.
Yes. Rob, what are some of the protocols and safety measures that the mariners at McAllister Towing are following?
Oh gosh, we have a long safety management system. I would say, without going into painful detail of every single one, because the volumes are they're out there. Accountability that it's actually being followed is the big one. So, you know, you can have a great safety management system, as Tony was talking about, and then you have a valve that's left open for a sounding, right? Because it's easy for that one time to do it. If it becomes routine and mundane, those are the ones that are most vulnerable to trip up, whether it be a bunkering operation, whether it be a towing operation, or whether it be a mooring operation, right? These are things that it's a script, and if you have to deviate from the script, let's have a talk about it, right? You shouldn't deviate from the script. Like when he was talking about, you know, something, a valve being wired up. When I used to do inspections myself, I found that. And when you find that, you have to call it out. You have to put corrective measures to make sure that not only it's corrected on that one ship, but the lesson is that for the fleet, it's
Yes.
well understood, the dangers. Simon Sinek always talks about focus on the why, right? The circle, the golden circle, right? The why, the how, and the what. But if people really understand that mariners will always work their hardest out there, and that my heart is always with the mariners. That's my beginnings, right? But if they understand the why of why something is a protocol or safety management system is in place, you'll typically get more compliance. But understanding the why, much like the SOLAS regulations, those whys, they get lost in the regulations, but explaining to people the why, like we lost, you know, the Titanic, you know, 1,100 people went in the water and didn't come home, right? If you want to talk about other Adria Doria, you know, not knowing how to use your radar properly, right? And you know, all these accidents and what the so what is. If you take the time to explain to the people that are on board, especially the junior members, but sometimes also the senior members, you have to remind, this is a place, this happen because of this. And this is going to, you know, nobody goes on board to shortcut a protocol to make things messy. Nobody does, you know, but they try to make it easier. They don't realize sometimes they're making it harder, maybe even more riskier.
Yeah, in the your business, Rob, in the towing business, it's US based, and you have more accessibility to the tugs and equipment and the people, whereas we're insuring ships of every nationality under the sun, under different flags, trading worldwide. So we don't have the ability to actually go on board those ships. So we rely on surveyors, you know, very experienced ex merchant mariners, to do our work, and when we vet those surveyors very closely. But we also, in addition to that, have a very robust loss prevention program where we produce all kinds of publications, plug and play things where we can ship something to the ship, or they can purchase them and play these publications during their safety meetings, for instance. And the posters on the walls, usually in comic form, which kind of bring into an amusing way the issues on board, and so we do focus a great deal on providing ships with those publications, encourage the owners to use them.
The members of the IG put out a great product.
Yes,
they really do. Before I was with McAllister, I was with ship owners in the area, and those loss preventions are invaluable. And no kidding, conversations with senior officers to be held, and they're better when you make it part of the safety management meetings that should be held often.
Yes. Tony, can you touch a bit on how important crew training is in preventing navigational accidents and what challenges might be faced in regards to training?
Crew training. Well, of course, the crew qualifications they have to go through and be certified under STCW. And the training is really up to the ship owner to ensure that his crew are suitably qualified and trained through the shipping agency and the crewing and manning agency. On board ship, it's really up to the shore management to oversee that during their periodic visits to the ship to make sure that they're complying with the safety management systems. And of course, you can't beat the oversight of senior officers who are overseeing the junior officers on board. That's essential to have that because junior officers often come on board, and these days I think that the sea time that we're seeing is much reduced compared to how it used to be. Some officers are sailing as captain with very little, sea time as chief officer before that. There's just the minimum requirements. There's a shortage of qualified officers to man the worldwide fleet, I'd say. And I think part of the thing is to create better conditions for seafarers so that they're encouraged to go to sea and to seek a maritime career, because it's not all about the money. It's about, conditions on board and culture on board and so on. But it's a very complex situation, for worldwide shipping, because on ships you have multinational crews who don't have the cultural connection that, say, the American seafarers would on board McAllister tugs. You have, sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 different nationalities, so you don't have that bond, if you like. But anyway, I ramble on, but I think it's just we hold our ship owners to manage their training on board as best they think fit, and we oversee that during our surveys.
Thank you. And I know we have multiple questions coming into the chat, so I want to switch topics real quick before we get to those. Over the past several weeks, we have had some pretty significant high tides. There's many pictures and videos of those record high tides coming in and showing up in social media. So how does that sea level rise and increased storms affect navigation, and how is it affecting mariners? Rob, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Navigation. Oh, well, okay. So sea rise, yeah, for sure. Well, we'll start with the good news.
There's more water under the keel.
There is a lot more water under the keel. Areas that were previously not accessible will be accessible. Whether you like it or not, areas like the Northwest Pass might become viable year-round if the trend continues, which would literally take 3 weeks of sailing from Europe to China off the market, right? So you could literally make that in about 2 weeks. That's the good news. All right, the bad news. With all the global warming, that's a lot of fresh water going into salt water. Most people may not understand what that means, but what it does mean is a change in salinity. Well, what does that do? Change in salinity affects currents, which drives wind patterns, which drives currents, temperature, salinity, and pressure, right? TSP, right? But when those things start to change and at different thermoclines of the water, that has negative impacts for the food chain. That has negative food chain impacts for the weather patterns that we're going to see. We start to see a lot more violent storms. When I went to sea, and it's not like Tony when he went to sea, because everyone has sea stories. But in all earnest, though, in the 90s, I don't recall as many I remember going through some violent storms. I don't remember as much periodicity as I'm seeing. There's a lot more. We have any given hurricane season now, you can definitely serve. There were times we never even got up to the middle of the alphabet. Now I think last year, a couple of years ago, we went all the way up to R or S. That's a lot.
Right.
That's a lot. Now it doesn't, the severity of things, I never saw. I remember growing up in the 90s, The Storm of the Century, and they made a great movie about it, The Perfect Storm. It seems like every other summer I hear about the storm of the century now these days, because they're becoming more violent. Category 4s and 5s. These are massive storms. And some of them hit land and have a dramatic impact on the environment, and some of them are at sea, which still has an impact on the environment, because these massive storms not only affect our sailors, but they change the currents and the wind patterns, and that has a negative impact on the environment as well. The Sargasso Sea, rich in nutrients and fish, just torn apart with all of these massive storms going through the Sargasso Sea. Usually it's right around the horse latitudes, and it didn't have much. It's a lot, right? Those are just some of the things that come off the top of my head. I didn't think about that question ahead of time, Megan.
Yeah.
But that's just what's on the top of my head.
El Nino is a classic sort of example of that, isn't it? How it affects the El Nino weather pattern has created it's a regularly occurring sort of phenomena, but that's an example of that.
Yeah. And Tony, are you seeing any shift within your clients with these weather-related patterns that are happening?
Well, it's our ships trade worldwide, and I can't point to in a word, no. I really yes, there's undeniably an increase in the frequency and strength of storms, typhoons and hurricanes, but I don't think that overall it's affecting the operation of our worldwide fleet.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to the chat now, and our first question comes from Carlene. You mentioned integrated bridge systems, but how can they be harmonized so a mariner can go from one ship to another? And Rob, why don't you take that one?
Integrated bridge systems.
So, yeah, it's a new thing, isn't it? Relatively speaking,
it is. And I'm trying to think how best I can answer that one.
By regulation, I think is what's going to happen. It's going to have to be regulated to make sure that when you go from one ship to another, well, just the way that ACTIS, for instance, you go from a seafarer will go from one ship to another, and he's using ACTIS equipment, and he's trained on that equipment, but he'll have to be trained on all the equipment that is used in that in that integrated bridge system. Is like
eventually, the only thing I would offer, Megan, is that eventually we all have a standard. And the manufacturers build towards a standard. Much like we aspire to have one cell phone charger. That'd be nice. We used to have that, right?
Yeah.
But the more individual systems are, more complicated and unique they are, the more study and care have to be given. The more standard they are, the easier it is to operate. They become interoperable. I think that standardization and less good ideas would be desired, if that answers your question.
Yes. And I believe Claudia also had one. With maritime credentials, how do we know who's on board? It's ever changing, what protocols are in place for that?
Well, there is a licensing requirement to get on board, and that's put in place by the flag state and certain crewing. And they have certain criteria which each flag state, right?
Yes, exactly. They're all signatories. It's international, STCW requirement for training, and all the signatories to it will have to comply with the within the rules. So it's
Earlier this year, I had to requalify with my master's license.
There you go.
Mhm.
You know, I had to go back and start taking firefighting classes again and advanced firefighting, and I got to go requalify on the radar and the
Yeah.
ECDIS. That's what we do, right?
Mhm.
But the standardized training, and that is key. And as Tony said, there have been when I worked on the international flag, that's tougher. Um, I don't want to. I don't want to be a pejorist, and I don't want to be run down some of the teammates that used to work for me. But there are some nations that have problems, concerns with the level of training, let's say. I think I could say that safely.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Do we have any other questions? Feel free to take yourself off mute.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Oh boy.
Pent up demand here. This is, aside from the word navigation, this is sort of an off-script question. Given what's going on in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, it's about freedom of navigation. And we're also, the US is also trying to preserve that in the South China Sea.
Mhm.
What needs to happen to keep our ships secure, but also make our mariners more comfortable being in those hot zones? We've got some limitations in terms of what the US Navy can do.
Mhm.
They can protect US flagships, but we've got to start paying attention to this as an industry, and we do from a commercial sense, obviously, but from a safety sense and also from a geopolitical sense. So what is changing or what needs to change in order to ensure our safety at sea in these hot zones?
I'll take a stab. So I'll go back to a quote from Clausewitz. The military is an extension of the policy of the government by any other means.
Hmm.
And what does that mean? So the military is not the answer. It only treats the symptom. It doesn't treat the cause.
Mhm.
If you're going to get at the real root reason and ensure safety of you have to get at the undercurrent of what's causing these problems.
Mhm.
If the Red Sea is an undercurrent, but it's less than one. There's a grouping problem set there, and the South China Sea, there's a problem set there, and you have to get there, and you can apply. Um, what can Americans do? What can the global economy do? Well, it's the global economy that can solve this, right? If you want to change it, those actors that are behaving a certain way, they need to know they're not behaving a certain way. And they need to be led to know. If they're empowered, they're going to continue doing what they can. And that once you address that, the safety of the waterways become clear. Otherwise, these long diversions are going to continue. And heaven forbid, an escalation. If it escalates, which could happen, the United States, if they do something in the next in the near term, that could be an escalation to the area in the Middle East. But that could also prompt another thing out in the South China Sea. But it is the world governments that have a stake in this, much like they do with the environment. If they have to say enough's enough, and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, there's not much that we, as in the shipping world, can do about it. It's just a matter of having geopolitical stability, and without that, there'll always be problems that yes, you can have armed guards on board, as we did during the piracy time in Somalia. to try and protect seafarers, but how could you protect them against incoming ballistic missiles and drones? It's just not possible. Yeah.
I wanted to touch back to something Claudia mentioned earlier in the chat, which also relates to the geopolitical context. Claudia says China is building up e-Loran infrastructure. China is the #1 shipbuilder, the #1 ship owner. They would love for the world to be on the renminbi, their currency. It almost looks as though they are building up an e-Loran infrastructure for them to access, and you have to be in their tent in order to make it functional. How do you look at China building up an e-Loran infrastructure in terms of global maritime security?
I see it as a backup plan should the global positioning system, GPS, becomes unavailable, which could happen. I don't think people realize how fragile the GPS system is. There's a number, the Russians have theirs, the Chinese have theirs, and the United States have ours, which have been up there for 30 years. And it can be manipulated and it can be taken down. I don't want to be a doomsayer, but I think that e-Loran is a backup plan for that. And I think that the system that we had, Loran C, I loved Loran C. It was great. Radio waves, time beacons. You knew exactly where you were. Right. I guess I'm showing my age, Tony. I didn't have Omega though.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So any final questions before we do our wrap up for this afternoon? All right, well, I'm going to share my screen because we do have some exciting things coming up with NAMEPA. Our first one will take place on Tuesday, February 27th from 4 to 6 in the afternoon. Let me just make sure my screen is sharing. And it is my computer. All right, and this is our NAMEPA Regions Gathering in Houston. We're network collaborating on the marine environment and awareness, workforce development, and other initiatives that are taking place in Houston will happen. This is in person. And our next event that we have coming up is our Marine Operations Seminar, which is Leaping into the Future, Challenges and Consequences in Maritime Operations. The registration links for these are going to be posted into the chat right now, and you can register. Both of these events are in person, so we hope to see you at these two events that we have coming up with NAMEPA. This one will be hosted at the Houston Pilot, so it's very exciting to see that as well. But thank you so much to our panelists, Tony and Rob, and to everyone answering and asking the questions. It was great to see everyone, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. This will be recorded and posted on our YouTube, so if anyone didn't get a chance to sit in with us live, it will be recorded and posted. But thanks again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Take care.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Colleen and Megan and Rob. Nice to have met you all.
Nice to meet you as well.
Take care.